Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Latin America Hunting for the Next Milestone in the Renewable Energy Transformation, Part 2, Energy Transition, the Cases of Argentina, Bolivia, and Colombia. We are grateful to Dr. Ricardo Reinere and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a wide range of products and services to address our members' needs. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find on our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please use Zoom's Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom window to make known your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address your questions. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our presider, Dr. Ricardo Reinere, past president of IAEE, member of the High Level Dialogues Technical Working Group on Energy Transition, United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs, as well as professor at the Catholic University of Chile, who will lead this webinar. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Welcome to this webinar, Energy Transition, the Cases of Argentina, Bolivia, and Colombia. This is a year of a great discussion about energy transition. A few years ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations invited the Secretary General to make a high-level dialogue on energy transition for this year. United Nations has been working very hard with additional partners to set up a framework of discussion at the highest levels in the system to give a big push for energy transition. The idea is to be online with sustainable development goals by 2030. And on that matter, the United Nations has set some working groups in different themes. One is energy access, other energy transition, enabling sustainable development goals through inclusive just energy transition, innovation, technology and data, and finance and investment. So with that in the background, it would be a good idea to see how the countries are preparing for the energy transition and the big push that we expect that this year will receive this matter that is very important on one side for sustainable development goals, but also on the other for the issues of climate change. So in this webinar, we have 3 distinguished speakers. Gerardo Rabinovich, who is Vice President of the Argentinian Institute, of Energy, General Mosconi in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a well-known friend of the International Association for Energy Economics, of the Latin American chapter of the International Association for Energy Economics. In second place, we have also a very good friend for a long time, Mauricio Medinaceli, who is a former minister of hydrocarbons in Bolivia. He's professor at the Universidad Católica de Bolivia. And also in third place, we have Isaac Diner, also a long friend from the International Association, the Latin American Association of Energy Economics, who is the Dean of Natural Science and Engineering at University Jorge Tadeo Lozano in Bogota, Colombia. So what kind of issues we will be addressing here? Well, we want to know how these countries are preparing and managing their energy transition, their commitment with sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement. What are their plans in terms of renewable energy, energy efficiency, clean transportation, the role for renewables? Is there any plan in terms of the phase out of fossil fuels? And what role they see in the international community on supporting energy transition in this country? So we will have 3 presentations. We will ask first Gerardo Rabinovich, then Mauricio Medinaceli, and third Isaac Diner to give us a presentation for about 15 minutes. So thank you and welcome. And Gerardo, welcome with your presentation.
Thank you, Ricardo. Good morning, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, David, to let me work in the International Association for Economic Energy in this series of webinars. Let me share with you my presentation about the Argentina case in the topic of energy transition. First of all, I like to walk about definition. What we talking about when we talk about energy transition, and one definition is an energy transition usually involves a change more or less accelerated in an energy system, usually towards a new source, technology, or vector, preferent clean source. During the Argentine presidency of the G20 in 2018, the following principles were agreed for all the countries. Each country has a different starting point with access to different resources, different demands, technologies, access to capital and financing, with the goal of energy transition toward cleaner and more transparent energy system. Also, energy transition are strongly linked to the issue of climate change, and they transcend it by being linked to other social, economic, environmental, and technical aspects of the energy issue. But the climate dimension takes priority when considering the importance of the energy sector in terms of its participation in global and domestic emission of GHG and its role in the framework of national determined contributions. In the framework of the Paris agreements, we have 2 instruments, the long-term strategy and the national determined contribution for the commitments that each country assume in their agreement. First, net zero CO2 and large reductions in other greenhouse gases are needed by 2015-17 to meet the goals of maintaining non plus 1.52 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial temperatures. In Latin America, transition to net zero CO2 emission is possible. Technically possible, we need to work all over the energy sectors. Not only in the power sector, it's common to talk when we talk about energy transition only with power sector, but with the renewable energy power generation in the power sector and non-GHG emitter, and there is a discussion, but nuclear and big hydro are important to achieve the goal in 2015. But we need to work in widespread electrifications in transport, industry, change our ways of life and increase the public transport and non-motorized transport like cycles, walking, etc., and increase fundamentally energy efficiency all over the sectors of the economy. The tools of the Paris Agreement, I said, are the national determined contributions that each country presented in 2016, 2015. The NDC are not ambitious enough to achieve the objective of the Paris Agreement. We need more ambitious objectives with that we are now. The global warming arrived to 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We need more ambitious scenarios to achieve the goal, and with that, the revision of NDC are mandatory, and it needs to be coordinated with the long-term strategies that each country need to present at the Secretary of the United Nations for Climate Change in the framework of the Paris agreements. The Argentine is signatory of the agreement, and the country present your NDC in 2016, but one revision in 2019, and the last revision is in 2020, more ambitious each time. The energy is the main sector of emission of greenhouse gases, but we need to remember that Argentina is an agro country, and the agriculture is responsible for 37% of emission. In the first NDC, Argentina has presented an unconditional commitments, and the main sector in this commitment is the energy sector. Here you have the commitment, the trajectory of the scenarios in the business as usual, in the unconditional scenario with a reduction of 109 megatons of CO2, and with conditional commitments, the reduction is an additional of 114 million tons of CO2. I like to say that the unconditional commitments are mainly in the forest sector. The growth of the greenhouse gases in Argentina was in the past very important. That's with the fall of the GDP of the country and the economic activity make that the greenhouse gases emissions in the last 10 years was reduced, but not for actions of reduction of emissions, if not by economic reduction. The principal determinants of the GHG are population, GDP per capita, energy intensity, carbon intensity, and emissions has result from energy sector. In the NDC of 2016, the energy sector was responsible for 53% of the measures, and here you can see the principal actions that the country commit to take with an preeminence of supply side with 56.5% of the total reduction emissions in the energy sector, and the demand side with 43.5% of the reduction of emissions. We think that the supply side is overestimated because the problems of build a big project of infrastructure like nuclear power, big hydro, etc. And the demand side is underestimated because the energy efficiency must to have a very large part of the actions in the strategy of the country. The goal of reducing emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050 requires integrated policy planning, measures, and actions. The energy, transport, industry, and building sectors must coordinate the opportunities to substitute the consumption of fossil fuels and promote the saving and efficient use of energy. The mitigation options to be adopted in the transportation sectors are highly restricted by the deficit in the existing infrastructure and by the policies and pricing decisions that are being taken in the energy sector, which reinforces the need to strengthen coordination efforts and targeting to benefit from potential synergies between energy and transportation sectors. To achieve the proposed decarbonization objective, it is necessary to build a long-term and systematized information system, particularly in the transport and building sector, where doesn't exist very reliable information and long statistics to propose adequate policies and measures supported by continuous and reliable statistical information. At the end of 2020, Argentina present at the UNFCCC the second national determined contribution with a commitment to increase the reduction to arrive in 2030 with 364 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That was an emission of 2016. In the second NDC, Argentina is committed to an absolute economy-wide and unconditional goal of not exceeding the net emission of 355 million tons. That means that Argentina is committed to not increase the emission of 2016, but reduce in conditional way. That means with our effort of financing the measures that will be adopted. This new goal is ambitious since it is equivalent to a total decrease in emission of 19% by 2030 compared to the historical peak reached in 2007, and a reduction of 25.7% compared to the previous NDC submitted in 2016. Argentina is very, very committed to reduce and to achieve the goal of the reduction of emissions in the world, but the objectives are very, very ambitious, and we will see if we can arrive to it. energy transition to achieve the objective of the second C need to fix the criteria for prioritizing mitigation actions. The priorities are emissions reductions, transformation capacity of production and consumption models. There is a big transformation inside the energy transition, and the feasibility of the implementation of this measure in a very, very difficult economic environment for the country. The way for the energy sector is electrify all in 2015 end uses. For that, it's necessary to work in electromobility, biofuels, and hydrogens in the transport sector. We don't forget the need of have and power sector decarbonized when production of electricity came of renewables and other means of production like big hydro and nuclear. There we need a big discussion in the country and build an industry of energy efficiency in the industry building sectors with the incentive for the creation of new companies of energy services that today doesn't exist. It's a big challenge, but I like to transmit that the Argentine is committed with the accomplishment of the objective in the national determined contribution, and there is not a plan but an actions of mitigation measures to take in the next 10, 20 years to achieve that. But that's all. Thank you very much, and I wait the Q&A session later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. Thank you for being on time. Mauricio, we invite you to make your presentation. So after the three presentations, we will open the floor for discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to the International Association for Energy Economics for this kind invitation. So I will present now the case of Bolivia from maybe a different perspective from our colleague in Argentina, because I will present more like the data, because to plan in Bolivia, it's very difficult right now for the reasons that I will mention in the next slides. Okay, so let's start with the final energy consumption matrix that I built for some years ago. And this energy consumption matrix is for 1979. And as you can see here, oil products and wood represented more than 80% of the final consumption at that moment. Natural gas represented only 2% and electricity 8%. So the main energy consumed by Bolivians at that time were oil products. And inside these oil products, we can see the pie here. We have a lot of gasoline and a lot of kerosene and jet fuel, especially kerosene, because during the 70s and even the 60s, a lot of households in Bolivia consumed kerosene for cooking. So, and LPG was at the initial stage of consuming. So what I want to mention here, that during the 70s, the target of the Bolivian government was to use LPG instead of kerosene on the families. That was one of the key transition, if we can say that, policies at that moment to substitute kerosene with LPG. And this substitution was led by the national oil company, which is YPFB. But 10 years later, I am talking 1989, still oil products and wood represented more than 70%, with a small natural gas consumption. But as you can see here, the public policy to replace kerosene was starting to take account by households. And that's, you can see the LPG products, the LPG product start to be consumed by families. So during the 80s, an aggressive policy of introduce LPG in the households and even a small business was led by the, as mentioned before, the National Oil Company, YPFB. And here, 10 years later, 1999, we can see now that oil products and wood only represented 60%, but now natural gas represented 13% of total energy consumption in the country. So at the end of the 90s, the Bolivian government started to promote the natural gas consumption, not only at the industrial level, also at commercial and vehicles. And as you can see here, on the second pie, we can see the kerosene and jet fuel dropped to 11%, and LPG represented 22% of all the oil products consumed by Bolivians. So was almost 20 years took the public policy to replace kerosene instead of, to put LPG instead of kerosene. So 2009, as you can see, 10 years later, yes, we can see an aggressive policy to introduce natural gas inside the consumption of Bolivians. Wood dropped to 6% and oil products to 55%. You know? And this natural gas introduction was mainly on the industrial sector and the commercial sector, and CNG as well. We are talking here the final energy consumption, so we are not dealing here with natural gas that was used by thermoelectric plants. This is the final consumption. So we are talking here about industrial, commercial, CNG, and families, household. Now, on the right, you can see the LPG, diesel in the transport system, and gasoline are the key products on the oil product segment. In 2019, now we can see that now natural gas represents almost 30% of the final energy consumption. So we can see an aggressive public policy to put natural gas as an important natural gas energy source. And we confirm that diesel, LPG, and gasoline are now the three most important oil products consumed. But we can see a drop in LPG, especially because families and households are not consuming LPG anymore, and now they are using natural gas. So if I can go backward, you can see a very nice animation where natural gas is taking, and again, maybe I can do that again. Please look the natural gas, the yellow part here, natural gas during the last 40 years grew in a very good way. Okay, but nevertheless, it's still a fossil fuel. So let's see the big picture now. In terms of energy consumptions in TBTU, we can see the history of the last 40 years, where natural gas now is represent a huge part of the total oil consumption, but nevertheless, oil products represent more than 50% of total energy consumptions, where gasoline and diesel are quite important. Okay? And yes, as I mentioned before, if we only see the oil products, we can see that gasoline and diesel are the key products consumed by Bolivians, especially diesel in the in the agriculture, in the modern agriculture sector, and gasoline, of course, in the transport system. Good. So in terms of energy intensity, I wanted to put this graph on the screen on this PPT because it will support my idea that I want to comment with you in the next slide. As you can see, there was a more efficient use of energy until the 2002, I say, because we can see a drop in these indicators, barrel of equivalent petroleum, barrels of equivalent petroleum per thousand of GDP, $1,000 of GDP. So it's a measure of efficiency. And from 2003 to 2004, we can see an increase in efficiency. And my hypothesis is this is because all the energy prices, the main energy prices in the country are subsidized and froze at particular levels. So that induce to the final consumer to use the energy in a very inefficient way. But and here we can see a drop because the GDP growth decreased after the super cycle of the commodities prices. So the energy intensity give us an idea of the efficiency of Bolivians using the energy. Now, also this graph is important because as we saw before, natural gas now is an important part of the energy consumption in the country. And we can see the natural gas production, which is almost right now 45 million per million cubic meter, or a million of cubic meter per day, sorry. The issue here is that almost 20% of this natural gas production goes to the external market. And because the lack of exploration activity in the past during the super cycle of prices, and everybody was very happy in Bolivia with the increase in production, but during this period, the exploration activities were very few, with no success even. So we reach in 2015 a peak, and then we can see a drop because mostly the production capacity of the country is decreasing. And I will not go into the reasons why we can see this pattern, but the problem is that with some perspective of analysis that we are doing, this will start to growing down, and this creates some problems in 10 years to the internal market. So we have two issues here that create a problem. Natural gas became more important in the country in the consumption, but the production is in a declining phase. So it represents a challenge for us. And if everything goes as we expected, in 2033, maybe the exports to Argentina will be zero. And in 2040, the export to Brazil will be zero. And maybe from there, we will have to import natural gas if everything goes as business as usual. Something very important will have to happen right now. So my time is, I will, this is an abstract of what I said. Oil and gas represent more than 85% of the final consumption. During the 15 years, there is an increase of energy inefficiency. Diesel and gasoline are important. Bolivia imports more than 50% of total diesel consumption. And because the lack of exploration, natural gas production is in the declining phase. So how to move forward? This is the key aspects that maybe we have to consider. First, we have to remove price subsidies, because right now the price of natural gas in the domestic markets is way below the export price, is almost $1 per million BTU. The gasoline price is froze, as you can see here. And also, the second option is to remove the natural gas rents from the government budget. If we want to be more green as a country, we have to defossilize the fiscal accounts. This is a very particular graph. This is how the royalty and production taxes from the natural gas are split among all the national and subnational governments in Bolivia. So everybody gets money from the natural gas. So the incentive to be more green is not too high because everybody wants the royalties and production taxes. Remove the state monopoly of the electricity market. In the electricity market, right now, the national oil company has almost all the generation activity, all the transmission activity. So there is no room for private investors here in the country. So maybe we can open and remove the monopoly to the national electricity enterprise to be more green. And we have to solve the public transport system that is a social issue. If we want to be more green, we have to solve something like this. This is a terrible picture of my country that happens in many cities. You can see all the white buses are public transport buses. And so the situation is terrible. So if we want to be more green, we need a massive transport system. And if we go to the massive transport system, we have to give jobs to all these people. So this is a double challenge right now. So the conclusions are here. Natural gas represents 30% of total consumptions. We have problems with future natural gas production, excessive dependence on oil products, and to move forward, we have to remove energy subsidies with the social problems associated. We have to some fiscal issues and remove the state monopoly in the electricity market and solve the public transport system. So I hope I am in my 15 minutes. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Ricardo.
No, thank you, Mauricio. Thank you very much for your presentation and well in time. Isaac, your time. Thank you. You are there.
Thank you, Ricardo. Let me. Yes. Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for the introduction, for inviting us for conducting this presentation. The idea is a little bit different, and of how I'm going to conduct my presentation, but in general terms, I would refer to the energy transformation in Colombia. And to begin, Ricardo just mentioned it, but I'm Isaac Diner I'm Dean of the Natural Sciences and Engineering faculty at the Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano. And what I intend to show you is here in this agenda. First, at the outset, I would say that I would mention how the progress has been in terms of the insertion of renewables in Colombia from 2000 to 2019. And then we will show briefly how the progress and commitment has moved forward from 2019 to 2021. And then I would try to interpret how the future would be like up until 2030, and some final thoughts about how this is happening and how I believe it could move ahead in the years to come. Briefly, the country has not made much progress in terms of the insertion and the diffusion of renewables from the beginning of the century up until 2019. And this, in spite of Law 691, was a law that was launched in 2001, and the intention was to promote what we call rational energy use and renewables, but not much progress was made in these first initial years. But we had an interesting facility, Hepirachi, in 2004, the first wind farm in Colombia, and 20 megawatts. That was interesting to begin with. And the plant benefit from green bonds and little money from this Science Foundation and Science and Technology funds. But after that, there is nothing relevant in terms of more projects of this size or even more, in spite that we had Law 1715 that was supposed to promote renewables in the country, but still in the phases of implementation. It hasn't really worked for the initial 5 years. Very little progress, no goals in terms of how much wanted to achieve in terms, and very little was achieved, in fact, but nothing to be proud of. So the first 19 years of the century, we saw little progress, and some people in academia like us and started getting worried because there was an opportunity. Colombia is 70% hydroelectricity in its matrix, and it's an opportunity incorporating a variety of alternative renewables. If you consider hydroelectricity a renewable, when you have dams as important part of it, but we thought that it's a good idea to have household participation in the market for generating their own electricity, and the same for industry, given the progress in terms of technology and the prices that we were experiencing in Colombia and everywhere else. But we kept on investigating how it would be, how Colombia would be like if we incorporated more electricity. And we have in the early days experimentation, simulations, and evaluations. And this is a paper that we presented at the Journal of Cleaner Production. And we showed that if there was some sort of policy in terms of tax deductions in place, we could achieve up to 1.6 gigawatts of renewables by 2022. So that was trying to figure out how to promote electricity in the beginning. But the story in the 2010s, from 2010 to 2020, was a bit accidental, and it was challenging because we were playing with, as I show here, with the fire and at the brink of a blackout because the margin was shrinking. That means the margin, the system margin between supply and demand was coming down, and we were exposed to weather variations, particularly the Niño, that affects Colombia strongly, and we show that in the future to come, if nothing is done, we could move into blackouts, and that's not our work and our research, but also Afanador was showing that we were not using firm energy from cheap sources, but we would start using very expensive sources, and that actually happened. And I call it at the age of we were working at the age of a razor blade, and we were experiencing very high electricity prices. I show here in 2015, we at one day we had $1 per kilowatt, 30,000 pesos of the time, and but the average price in between November or October of 1915 to April 16 was very high prices, 20 to 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And what was happening? We were experiencing a drought, and we were experiencing a Niño, a strong Niño. And the minister at the very difficult days of the threat of blackouts came on television and showed, he was optimistic. No, we are going to recover reservoir levels for electricity generation, and things would be better. But everyone was getting nervous in the country. So the minister didn't stay in office any longer, and the president came up every day telling us that we should save electricity. And this is the president of Colombia at the time, in 2016, and saying that we should save up to 5% of our consumption in the households and the industry and so on. Otherwise, we would be penalized. So he was asking for demand response to blackouts, and we were doing well. This third week of the crisis, we were saving up to 15% of electricity he was registering. And that's, we were lucky, started raining, and then we had enough supply of electricity. And so we managed to go through this crisis with not having to go into forced rationing. So did institutions work? Yes, I would say yes. The president is part of the institutional framework, but not markets. Markets weren't doing their job properly. We weren't getting enough supply of electricity, and the president had to come to save the thing. But things were not getting better as time passed by. And this was, as I mentioned, 2016. But in 2018, we had a crisis, another different crisis. And this is the explosion of Hydroituango, the largest facility being built in Colombia for electricity generation, about to cover 17% of demand. And so it was, the explosion was a big crisis because we made an alarm in terms of the threat of collapse of the facility. And that was due to operate in 2018 at the end of that year. But the news weren't good. And when you have you're expecting to cover electricity by 17%, and you have delays up to 6 years, and we're counting, margins get even tighter, and you have to move fast. So what are the alternatives? Not to move into outages in cases we have another Niño. So we came out and published an article in the press and saying, look, there is no time for messing about, and we have to move fast. And the only way to do it is to replace hydroelectricity, Hydroituango, by renewables and demand participation. And this was in 2018. And luckily, the new government was aware that the new government is Duque's government, the new president of Colombia, the present president of Colombia. I think he didn't have any alternatives, because if we were if we would confront another bad period of low precipitations in the country, and El Nino and so on, we would have to confront big problems. So the country moved ahead, the government moved ahead, and the minister launched 2 auctions, and 2.4 gigawatts of new renewables were awarded, and these are supposed to start operating by 2022. And in a country that is today 17.2 gigawatts, 2.4 makes a difference. And also transmission lines were auctioned to support the transmission of these renewables from the places that they were generated, that they are going to be generated in the future to come, mostly in the north part of the country, in the Caribbean of the country, Caribbean region of the country, to the center of the country, and to support the needs of the people in the Caribbean. And not only that, but the auctions operated relatively well, not the best prices of the auctions at the time, but good enough. And what we got out of this is that we needed to start implementing this, and but at the same time, the country was engaged with 51% emissions reduction by 2030 and to carbon neutrality by 2050. The challenges ahead, and I'm running out of time. Challenges ahead is that we by 2024, we expect not to have 2.4 gigawatts of electricity running for the country, but much more than that. And in total, we will be around 12 gigawatts, which is a lot. Remember that we have a 17.2 gigawatts running of power in the country. And we're moving ahead with transmission lines, but at least 7 gigawatts of electricity, of renewables should be available by 2024. We expect that. And our research shows that this is possible, this is feasible. And if this is happening, what we will get out of this is clean, cheap, and secure electricity for the country. And thanks, the security would be part of the complementarity between different sources, and that means hydro. So yes, we can, but we need to, and I'm about to finish, we need to implement a well-developed contract market. So this is challenges for policy and for regulation. Marginal prices for balancing only, demand participation, and getting a hand from energy economics and political economy will be important to convince everyone to move ahead, rather than let those who don't believe in renewables we have to say that renewables are not the ideal way to do it. We should move back to the fossil economy, and but will we? We need to do it, and we must do it. So by 2030, and that's our engagement now in terms of a new project, to see that we can be 100% renewable by 2030. Thank you very much, Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Well, we have three very good presentations. Different countries, different realities, different challenges. So we will invite our audience to submit questions in the chat, and I will start with one question for the three of you. How we plan for the energy transition? From your presentation, I see big challenges ahead. So how can we plan for an energy transition that will be speeded up with United Nations commitment this year to move ahead with a strong push to Sustainable Development Goal number 7. So how we plan for that, and particularly in three countries where hydrocarbons, oil, gas, plays an important role in the economy, and that put challenges in terms of not only transforming the energy mix, but there are social challenges that are very important and cannot be dismissed if we want to move to net zero economy, CO2 economy by 2050. So, Gerardo,
Yes, Ricardo, thank you for the question. In Argentina, we have national energy and climate change plan that was made by the climate change cabinet. Is an horizontal cabinet with participation of the ministries concerned. Well, in my opinion, it's not a very strong plan. It's a whole measures and actions and infrastructure coverage that is very difficult to know if we can to make all is in this plan. We have to in the same cabinet of climate change and transport plan and buildings plan, etc. That means there is a will that we need to be more perfect, more real to achieve the goals. And we have a discussion with the hydrocarbons versus, Isaac said something about this, hydrocarbons versus renewable, etc., with the development of the non-conventional oil hydrocarbons in Vaca Muerta. And then if we have a commitment to net zero emissions in 2050, well, Vaca Muerta is over. Because the development of Vaca Muerta need 20-25 years to be feasible. Well, Argentina has put their will to have to achieve the goals in 2030 and 2015, but we will see. It's not an easy task.
Thank you. So there is a challenge of locking in to fossil fuel technologies.
Yes.
So Mauricio.
Thank you, Ricardo. I believe we have two options in Bolivia, the hard way or the soft way. And that depends on a political decision, unfortunately, because this political decision has to plan in advance what can happen in the country. So from my perspective, in order to plan any energy transition, you have to remove energy subsidies. Otherwise, there is no room for renewable or other energies. That creates some social issues. But right now, the energy subsidies are also creating some fiscal issues that maybe can be complemented with the energy issues. The second one is the public transport system. Right now, we have a social problem in Bolivia because the truck drivers are getting a lot of issues with a big transport system by train from Chile to Bolivia. And now they are opposing to that because they will be without any jobs in the future. And third, the monopoly of the electricity company in the country puts some some legal barriers to the entrance of the private sector. So all these are political issues, I believe. And I think we have to convince to the Congress and maybe the president that if we don't work right now, in 10 or 15 years, Bolivia will have to start importing natural gas. So in order to do not take this hard way, maybe we can plan in advance. But we all know the technical solutions right now in the country. All the technical people knows what to do. The issue is if the politicians will take the decision to move forward, because anybody can write a plan. The problem is to follow the plan in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mauricio. Isaac.
Well, thank you, Ricardo. As I mentioned in my presentation, I believe we don't have an alternative than just to move ahead with 100% renewables, given the time constraints. We are very short in terms of the system margin in the system in electricity, and for that reason, there's no time to move to get new projects in terms of coal or gas, fortunately, because this would take 5 to or more years, and we may confront a new Nino in the years to come. So we would be in threats of a blackout. So, but in terms of a plan from government, there is not such a thing. The government just mentioned or just established that wants to move ahead with 51% emissions reductions overall in the country, but doesn't say specifically what's the goal for the electricity sector or energy in general terms. But the minister came out the last few weeks ago and said that he's part of the leading ministers in the region for an initiative of 80% renewables. But that doesn't mean how much this would mean for particular countries like Colombia. So briefly, I just believe that there is not such a plan, but it would happen. But to happen correctly in terms of becoming 100% renewables in the country, we have to plan it in terms of the institutions needed. And institutions needed means regulation. What sort of regulation is what is required? So for this to work, fine, because we don't have the regulation, the appropriate regulation for dispatching electricity coming from renewables or from other sources, depending on sunny days or dark days.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. So leadership, political will is key to move the agenda, to move commitment. I will ask in 1 minute to each of you some questions. So I will ask you to answer in 1 minute. We are over the time. Different topics, so if you can briefly comment on each of them. Civil society, I think, has a big say today in energy transformation. So how important is the work of civil society on pushing an energy transformation agenda in your countries? The second one is the case of Argentina, Bolivia. Lithium is a key resource for renewables technology, for electromobility, and certainly for storage. So are we on track to provide in a sustainable way these materials that will be needed for energy transition? Green hydrogen is part of the agenda of some governments. So you have a word about that. I know it's something that there is some words about that in the case of Colombia. So Gerardo.
Yes, with the first question, I think that without solutions, social solutions, there is not energy transformation. The energy transition need to have economic, social, and environmental and financial solutions. The second question about the lithium in the country, there are expectations about the potential of exploitation of lithium and its transformation in batteries in the country. But you know, it's a emergent technology. We not have the companies to develop, the national companies to develop the exploitation of lithium and to make batteries to electrical vehicles. And then, if you like, we see in the future potential, but now we work in legislation about the lithium industrialization, if you like, or, and exportation, etc. But it's very, very in its beginning, this issue.
Okay, thank you, Gerardo. Mauricio.
Thank you, Ricardo. I believe the civil society can benefit from the transition to renewable energies doing projects like your project, Ricardo. I believe the Institute to promote the knowledge and research on new technologies and promoting projects can give to the civil society what they are now expecting, which is jobs. The oil and natural gas sector are capital intensive. So the renewable energy, maybe through research, maybe through the building of materials, I don't know, can give to the civil society, okay, we don't have royalties, but we can offer you jobs. And we can offer you opportunities to work in an international level, new technologies and everything. So maybe the focus should be the young people. I believe this is the key aspect. There's a room there. And regarding your second question, in Bolivia, we have to separate what is natural gas and lithium. Right now, the natural gas production in Bolivia faced a royalty close to 50% of gross revenues. So in the mind of the people, they believe that lithium can pay also 50% of gross revenues as royalty, and all the region in the lithium field, they believe that they will go out from poverty using this kind of royalty. So the initial step is to say natural gas is not lithium from an economic perspective. The lithium generate rents, but not as high than natural gas. It's impossible. So once you explain that to the people, and once you say, okay, we will get a benefit from lithium, not from the royalty or tax perspective. We will get more maybe jobs on the field. Maybe we'll have an international presence as a Bolivia, and we can generate value chain, because right now we are ensembling cars in one region in Bolivia, electrical cars. So maybe we can blend these two industries. So maybe the key factor here is how to promote jobs with the renewable energy in oil and gas producing countries like Bolivia.
Thank you, Mauricio. Isaac?
Thank you, Ricardo. Just a few words. I already mentioned most of what is regarding the questions, but my colleagues have contributed greatly to what it should be done in general to make to create jobs and to have social acceptability. The difference between Colombia and the rest of the countries, Argentina and Bolivia, that are being discussed here, is that Colombia has 70% hydro and good reservoir backup that would help the transition to be smooth and should follow the examples of Uruguay and Costa Rica that have successfully moved ahead with the transition and successfully. So it's a little bit of making sense of how to make it smooth. And I mentioned it, to make it smooth is to move fast, to get the regulation correct. And in that sense, it would be an example, following the examples of Uruguay and Costa Rica, for example. And regarding the technologies, other challenges, green gas, Ricardo knows better than all of us here about how to move ahead with such technologies. Colombia is intended to move ahead with this. The minister and some of the institutions are considering this. So perhaps that's an opportunity for Colombia. The rest is trying to get industry involved in the supply chain of renewables and see how it can contribute to be part of the industry's development of the country. But to get transport and the digitalization of economy as part of making a bigger electricity sector, that's an opportunity as well for developing and for moving ahead with society in different sectors than the traditional ones. So thank you very much, Ricardo.
No, thank you. Thank you, the three of you. Many questions remain. Certainly, we will be talking a lot more about this. What about transportation, electromobility, housing? So there are many challenges, but energy transition, I think, is something that is coming very strong in the following years to reach the sustainable development goals by 2030, where energy is a key vector to many other sustainable development goals. In the case of Latin America, Latin American countries are very rich in natural resources, so if things are managed well, inviting a large number of stakeholders, the civil society to have a strong voice on this, can be an example of energy transition transformation worldwide. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, your comments, your answers. So I go back to David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Wow, what a wonderful webinar. All of you presented so well on a timely topic that is not going away. I mean, the transition to more renewable resources in making our planes fly, our cars drive, our businesses run is here to stay. And it's affecting all of us. And in the long run, it's very good for the environment. So wish you all a wonderful weekend. Wish you all listening to this a good weekend as well. Be reminded that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available free of charge on our website shortly hereafter. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Dave.